one of the ways in which it's really important that we understand our difficult pasts, particularly histories that are traumatic, is through the testimonies of people who lived at that time, if we have the good fortune to still have them around among us. And with partition, it is that. And why is it important to understand that? Because the decisions, the political decisions, are made by politicians or by political formations in the shape of political parties and so on. But the consequences of those decisions are lived out by people in their lives, and not only in their lifetimes, but for years or generations to come, their legacies continue, as we see, for example, in our lives today. You know, the whole sort of enmities that are built up between different communities and so on and so forth, they come from the ways in which people lived the consequences of the decisions that were made by politicians and political parties. And if we were to study history only through the prism of those decisions, we would actually encounter an extremely arid terrain, bereft of the human ways in which those histories are lived out. And therefore, to get a fuller understanding of history, we must see the two together. I'm not saying that it should be either one or the other, but I think to get a sense of how people lived history, what they felt, what their difficulties were, and the ways in which history played out in very messy and complex ways in their lives, that is something that mere factual accounts cannot give us. And therefore, if we have the good fortune, as we do with partition, to have the living witnesses of that time among us, it's really important that we listen to their voices. And then, you know, the question always comes up, but these are individual voices, these are just single voices, or these are just anecdotes, and what can they have to do with history? And of course, I think that that's completely untrue, because what we need to understand is that history, as it is handed down to us, is seen to be a record of facts and moments in the past. And it is a record that is created chronologically so that we can make sense of things. But our lives function at many different levels, and chronology is only one of them. So at any given time, here I am talking to you, there are 101 things going on around me, which are being enacted by other people, and they're also part of this moment. And in order to understand that moment, if we can get some of those histories together, some of those stories together, they really give us a way of understanding how history is lived out on the ground, or how these decisions play out. And therefore, they give us lessons for moments that we may not want to repeat. So if we say that partition is something that should never be repeated in terms of the violence, the displacement, the loss, the grief, the upheaval, all of those things, we're not going to understand it by listening to Gandhi and Jinnah and Nehru, although those things are important. We're going to understand it by listening to a woman who was abducted and what it did to her life, or by listening to somebody who lost their entire family and who was never able to go back to track that history or to form a closure, somebody who was uprooted from their village and could never recover that sense of being anchored, all of these things. And we need to understand that. You know, there are so many people of the second and third generation who are children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of partition refugees. Often they say that they feel a sense of being lost, because when somebody says to them, "Where are you from?" the standard question that we asked in India, they have no answer, because the place where they're from is somewhere unreachable, inaccessible, unknown because of partition. And therefore that anchor that anchors people gets lost. So there are so many reasons why we need to listen to the wisdom, the experience, the compassion, the learnings that people have absorbed in their minds, their bodies, their hearts from traumatic histories. And there is no way that we can dismiss those.